you tell me a little bit about what your role is all about and what you do?
So I'm a community children's occupational therapist, and I work mostly on the physical disability team, so working with children with cerebral palsy or physical head injuries, those kind of things, really.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's my job at the moment. So how about you?
My name's Anne, sorry I didn't introduce myself to start with. And I'm a speech and language therapist working in paediatrics, so I work in community as well. So I work across a range of different clinics with children. I go into educational settings as well to support children and teachers and educators for children who've been referred for speech, language and communication difficulties.
Cool, so are you based at Stepping Stones?
I'm based at Stepping Stones, but I work all across the county. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So have you always worked in that role?
No, I've had a range of jobs. So qualified in 1986, a long time ago now, and worked for about 17 years in a range of jobs, several different NHS trusts, mostly working with adults. Always wanted to work with children, but life never kind of took me to a role at that time. And then I took a career break, so I was away from OT for, again, 17 years, so worked almost as long as I had a career break for, mostly focused on the family. But during that time, I worked in a range of things. So I worked in schools. I was a Senko at an outdoor children's nature nursery. Fantastic. I did a lot of supporting kind of behavioural communication responses. Worked as one-to-ones in schools.
Wow,
all
what an
the
interesting
time,
background.
Yeah, all the time I think I was still being an OT, really. So
lots of kind of related but different roles.
Lots of
before you
related
came to this
stuff,
one.
lots of, I learnt a lot about education healthcare plans, a lot about what it's like in a school, and those are things that I can kind of bring to the role now, that kind of understanding of, you know, when we ask teaching assistants to do something, or we're asking teachers, or we're trying to implement strategies in schools, I can see it from that kind of, from that flip side of being there doing it.
On the other side,
so I didn't realise at the time that all of that was going to come in really useful. So how about you? What have you?
Yeah, I mean, in a similar way to you, really. I've had quite a portfolio career, really. I haven't always been a speech and language therapist. I started out, I've always done sort of education-based roles, so started out as a primary school teacher, and I've done some teaching English as an additional language in private language schools as well. I moved into special educational needs support, so I've worked as an SEN support advisor, and also a teacher of the deaf was my previous role to this one. So like you, lots of experience of working in settings that would allow you to understand how you can best support people in this role, really.
So what led you into speech and language then? From
I went to work in New Zealand straight after I qualified. And when I came back, there weren't really any jobs available in the profession, and because of a range of reasons, I ended up going back into education. But I always had that urge and that desire to come back into speech and language therapy. And like you, kind of life just rolls on and you don't make a change. And then I reached a point where, after I had my second child, I thought, no, it's now or never. I either go back and become a speech therapist again, or it will never happen. So
is that what led you back to do your return to practice?
That is exactly what led me back to my return to practice. So people always ask me, how did you find out about return to practice? And I often forget where I actually found the information out, but basically I found out about the National Return to Practice programme and signed up for that, and they really supported me and signposted me to other areas of support from there, really. So I came through return to practice during COVID, which was interesting because obviously, you know, I was requesting in different places to get clinical shadowing experience, and of course that wasn't possible. So, you know, there was a point at which I really nearly gave up, to be honest, because you have to have some sort of clinical practice or some sort of practice placement as part of the requirements to return. But I was really fortunate to find out about AHP Health Education England running a leadership programme, so they offered a virtual placement.
Right.
So I could, learn that way and gain some skills that way, and fulfil the requirements for return to practice through that.
So did you do your return to practice and then look for a job rather than having a job to...
I did not have it,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I also I also became part of the first cohort of return to practice programme with Birmingham City University.
Right.
So that helped quite a lot because they've got virtual practice-based learning. So they kind of do mock-up clinic scenarios, and it's multidisciplinary. Okay. So that was really amazing because you got to work virtually alongside OT, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, paramedics, returning to practice, speech and language therapists returning to practice. And then there was either a person who was an expert by experience, so say an adult with autism, explaining their situation, and you had then to interview them about something, or they also had actors who pretended to have a particular condition, and you had to come into the clinical scenario virtually and conduct that interview or that consultation. So it was, and then you could sort of come away from that and discuss as a group, how do you think that went, and what happened, and how do you feel about it, what would you do differently next time. So it's really great because you had that multidisciplinary side. So
that sounds like quite a kind of structured process for you. So was your return to practice then kind of part of that course at Birmingham? Okay.
So I've done lots and lots of little things, and I also managed to get a few days of shadowing with a private therapist locally who very kindly gave her time and offered support that way. So it doesn't always have to be through the NHS. No. I expected that to be a no, but it's a case of if you don't ask, you don't get.
No, and I know quite a few people who've done that, who've actually linked in with private therapists to do their clinical hours.
Interesting,
So,
because they they're sort of gaining nothing from it, so you expect them to say no, but they were, really.
No, other than, bringing people back into the profession.
Absolutely.
Because I think for all of our allied health professionals, life experience is a really valuable thing. So, you can do your qualification at uni and straight from school and A-levels, but that life experience, I think, really, really helps.
Absolutely. So did you do your return to practice in a setting then, and you were based in a setting already in a job? Yeah,
so I'd looked at coming back into the profession again through other routes. I'd kind of applied for an OT assistant role in social services, mostly so that I could look at trying to get that clinical experience again, but it just wasn't the right time, and I'd always had this wanting to work with children. That was my goal when I first went off. I'm qualified in 1986, so and I think life experience took me down the route of I've got young children I had young children who were autistic and have physical needs as well, so I'd kind of gathered quite a lot of experience in a slightly different route, and applied for a job at a local specialist further education college.
Okay.
So it was actually an OT job, but I went saying, look, I'd be looking to do my return to practice, and would you be willing to support me with that? So they employed me in an assistant role while I did my return to practice. So
really good.
It was kind of quite specialist, but really helped because I'd got all of that background experience in education, as a parent, as well as working through schools, and the kind of the learning disability, the autism, all of that kind of
lots of different things to bring to it, really.
Routes preparing for adulthood, all those kind of frameworks were all things that were kind of quite familiar to me personally. So I didn't go down that kind of structured route. It was more of my own self-directed, so looking at fulfilling X amount of hours of study within that clinical area. And I think one of the things about return to practice for me, that when I first thought about it, it seemed like this huge, big, you know, your role, my role covers so many things.
Very broad, aren't they?
Yeah, but actually once I got to really look at it, and I went through the Royal College of OT's website, who do fantastic information about return to practice and give you some guidance.
Yeah.
So X amount of hours clinically supervised and independent study, and then kind of formal recognised study as well.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that actually I only need to demonstrate my competence in that role at that time. I didn't have to demonstrate a much wider basis. So that once I got my head around that, that really helped.
That's a good point you raised there, actually, because you came through a different route to returning to me. You had that set idea of what you needed to do for your competencies and for your returning to practice, whereas I was kind of, I'm not really sure what I need to, and it was only when I really started looking at the standards of practice and looking at my professional bodies offers, what they've got on their website, on their you know, their membership site, that I started to formulate a set of ideas about what I need to do to upskill. What are my gaps? That's one of my big sort of, I guess, tips for anybody returning to practice is really think quite hard about what areas you feel you need to upskill in more, and focus just on those, because like you said, it's all so broad what we've got to cover, that if you try and do everything all at once, you'll just get overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's not like going and training all over again. No. It's, as you said, it's that looking at actually, you know, in order to do this particular role or what I might be going into, actually, how do I demonstrate my competency and what do I need to focus on?
Definitely.
And I think one of the things for me, because I'd been out of practice for so long, was those HCPC, the Healthcare Professional Council's kind of standards of practice and being fit to practice. That had changed quite a bit. Yeah. And the need to be able to demonstrate your continuing professional development and demonstrate how you're actually meeting those standards. And, you know, practicing within your scope of practice. That was all quite different for me. Yeah. And there's, I think there's quite a lot around now, I know, on the OT, Royal College of OT's website, in terms of developing a CPD portfolio. And that almost in a way was, you know, that identifying, using that career development framework to identify where were my gaps, where did I think I was, where did I feel I needed to get to, because I knew that I was actually going into a kind of a band 6 role as such once I'd demonstrated that. So I was kind of targeting those, that skill set really. So, and I think it is that, you know, when you're thinking about going back and it seems so huge, actually just break it down. Yeah. And the professional bodies have got so much.
Oh, they do, absolutely. And there's a lot been added in the last sort of year, 18 months, to be honest, to the Royal College's website, Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, that is, I should say. Royal College is what we use to say, the short version. But yeah, there is a lot of really helpful information on there now. And I don't know about the OT professional body site, but we have a CPD log platform that we can use as well. So when I started off doing my return to practice, I put together a spreadsheet, and, which is fine and works absolutely fine, but you know, for someone starting out now, I'd probably suggest that they went straight to the professional body's website and looked at what they've got to offer and use that platform. Because then you can continue that as you progress through your career, because obviously once you're back into role, you've got to continue and maintain your professional development. And speaking of which, that is another job that I need to do this week. Must keep up to date with that. So absolutely, it's record keeping, recording what you've done. That's a really big thing, isn't it, when you're returning to practice? Making notes of what you've done, what you've learned from it, how that will inform your practice going forward, all those kind of things.
And how you're meeting the standards.
And how you're meeting the standards at the same time.
I think that was quite a big change for me. That having to directly link into those.
So once you get into the mindset of doing it, it's absolutely fine. It just seems daunting at first, doesn't it? It's just getting started with these things.
And there are so many ways of doing that now. So many apps and different bits and pieces around. So. So how did you come to work for Shropcon then? So did you return to practice and then?
Yeah, so I live quite locally, and then a band 5 position came up, and I applied for it. Yeah, and here I am. Here I am, happily.
So how long have you actually been back?
I'm very, very recently employed, so I started back properly in January, really.
Wow.
So, yeah, just 3 months back in. So I'm still learning the ropes and still finding my way with lots of things, but that's okay. Asking lots of questions, endless questions. Everyone's sick of me asking questions.
No.
But that's okay, because I had said to myself to sort of not let myself get too overwhelmed. I did say to myself, it's okay to not know. You're not going to be across everything. You can't be across everything to start with, and that's okay. Just keep asking questions and it will be fine.
Yeah.
People are I found people are so willing to give their time and give their expertise and their knowledge, aren't they? Have you found the same thing?
Absolutely.
I've actually been really blown away by that. I wasn't expecting people to be kind of, reticent about it, but I just have been so blown away by how helpful everyone wants to be, how welcoming, how much there's a real desire to support the workforce, isn't there here? That's what I really like about working here. Yeah.
Supervision, line management, all those things were things that a long time ago.
Absolutely. That is something I find so helpful. So in my interview, I asked about supervision, and I was told what the sort of basic offer is, and I said, oh, okay, that's great, but would I be able to have a little bit more?
Yeah.
Would I be able to have this? And yeah, absolutely fine. We will give you whatever supervision you feel you need, and that has been put in place, and it absolutely helps me to do my day-to-day work, and have learnt so much from it. So I found that really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's not lip service, is it? It really is there. They,
no, absolutely.
Yeah, they invest in their workforce and your well-being as well. It's not just,
And there are different forms of supervision as well, aren't there, here? So that's something that I found really interesting. So rather than it just being bring a clinical case, 2 clinical cases and discuss them one-to-one with another therapist, there's other ways of doing it. So we have a less formal discussion group. I don't know if you have a similar thing.
Yeah.
And then we've got walking supervision as well, where we can sort of get the well-being walk at the same time, discussing more general things relating to the role and how we're feeling, and so
that sounds really interesting.
So there's lots of different ways of accessing supervision as well. Yeah. What do you have as a sort of career aspiration going forward?
When I was thinking about that one, it was it's difficult for me because I had almost 30 years of this being my aspiration.
Yeah.
And I do kind of feel like I'm there in terms of I'm working with children, working with families,
helping and supporting people
in a really supportive organisation, and it's I'm currently band 5, so there is scope there that I would be looking to kind of maybe take on a little bit more, maybe look at a band 6 role, look at kind of working with some students
definitely
as well. That would be really good.
That feels like a long way off for me, but I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So years ago I supported a student teacher, so now I feel like at some point in the future I'd like to do the same in this role, but I feel a little bit way off that yet. But it's good to have these ideas to take forward, isn't it?
To move forward, I just really enjoy doing what I'm doing, and having waited so long to kind of get there. I'm quite happy just to keep getting better and better at what I'm doing.
The other thing that I find is really good about here is that there was this willingness to listen to what your interests were in your role. So if you had a particular professional interest and you wanted to work in that area and maybe you'd never worked in that area before, then it was made quite clear that we'll do everything we can to try and facilitate that. So one of the areas that I highlighted in my interview that I was really interested in was to work with selective mutism along that pathway, and that's actually being facilitated for me. So I'm now work alongside another colleague, much more experienced colleague, who's kind of coaching me and guiding me through that to work in that pathway. So that's really great.
So you're bringing all those skills from when you actually weren't necessarily registered into the role alongside what you're doing now.
Yeah, and been helped to develop a specialism going forward as well.
Yeah.
But there are lots of wider roles as well you can kind of get involved in within the trust, aren't there? So I'm really interested in, partly because of the way my career's progressed, in preceptorship and how we can support early career AHPs, allied healthcare professionals, because I think it's really important to support people, isn't it, in the first 2 years?
Yes.
Whether that's returning to practice or whether that's coming straight from university. And obviously you've got people at different ages and stages of life, haven't you? So,
and I think that's one of the things I've found as well, having been in the NHS and coming back into the NHS, is I think from an OT perspective, the understanding of my role is I feel I don't have to justify what I'm doing as an OT in quite the same way as I maybe used to do. There is a real understanding of of our kind of occupation focus and that kind of much more structure around what we're doing. So you know, with that coming out, however you start on that career path, there is that. There's the support, but there's also some clear guidance now about what the expectations are, because it was very, very wide and vast wherever you were before.
Yeah, so, certainly things have changed a lot, but I do feel it's for the better.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's definite clear aims, clear roles for a service and where you fit into that. That service as well. So yeah, that really helps, I think, with the children, families and young people who are accessing our services, is that we know what it is that we're aiming for, and they know where they need to go to get help, and everybody's having an equitable service that way.
That's right,
which I think could have been quite different before. So, so sometimes I think you get NHS doesn't always get the best praise, but yeah, lots of changes for the better, really.
Definitely, yeah.
So, what about you for challenges? How's it been since you've been back, challenge-wise?
Yeah, so there have been a few challenges, obviously, you know, just getting up to speed with my clinical skills. Obviously, they're not going to be, you know, the same as somebody who has had opportunity to have a really structured clinical placement. And obviously, as I said, because of COVID, that just wasn't possible. So just, you know, recognising those and making time to plan in time to upskill before moving on to the next task, and managing my time accordingly so that I can do that. And not spending too long writing reports and thinking I've got to be perfect and I've got to write it exactly, you know, like this, or, you know, just getting things done that, you know, in a way that's good enough, you know, really. Because I'm going to develop those skills as I move through my career and move through this role. So yeah, it's just managing my time so that I can get everything done, you know, and also just looking at where my clinical skills are at and providing myself with some time in my schedule, with my diary, for planning that in and getting that done.
Yeah. And I found that's I think that's something that's valued now. It's not always got to be face to face, face to face, face to face. It's everything else that goes around that to make sure that it's good quality provision. So you know, and sometimes that is spending time actually researching something, finding out a bit more about it, which benefits you and benefits the families we work with as well. So yeah, it's everything else that goes around that contact.
Definitely, yeah, because a lot of what we do is signposting to other, you know, to other professionals, to other organisations who can support and help, and you know, that's a big part of it. So it's just getting to know all those local, you know, organisations, local offers for you know, voluntary organisations and things like that that are specific to the area as well, and understanding the different names and roles of different organisations, what they provide. That's been a bit of a challenge, but I'm getting there. Yeah.
Well, 3 months, you're doing really well.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. So if somebody was thinking about becoming a speech and language therapist, what would your advice be to them?
I think it's a really good idea to try and do some voluntary work in your local primary care trust, or with a private therapist, private organisation that offers a similar kind of work, because I think you can't really understand and know what a role is all about until you've actually lived it, experienced it, and shadowed someone actually doing the job day to day, and you gain so much valuable experience from that as well. But also there's an awful lot of information on social media now, so if you follow certain organisations and groups on Twitter, for example, there are lots and lots of avenues for gaining information more widely there, to give you a better flavour of what it's like to do that role. And also, you know, I think it's just talking to someone who's doing or has done the job is really invaluable, because that way you sort of dispel the myths that you've got in your own head, but also you can get answers to some key questions to see whether that's the right thing for you, and and how to go forward with it, really.
Yeah, so talking to people.
Talking to
find
people.
Out, real life
networking,
experience.
absolutely, really key.
Yeah, and that social media.
And I was, prior to returning to practice, really kind of averse to social media. It's not something I really sort of, you know, engaged with really. But now I would say that is one of the most powerful things that I did while I was returning to practice, because the information that I gained and gleaned and got access to through that has been really helpful.
In terms of CPD, LinkedIn and Twitter and all those kind of things are real good.
Yeah, definitely.
Real good platforms, aren't they, to follow people and
keeps you abreast of what's going on, what's really current, what's sort of cutting edge, rather than, you know,
can be a bit of a rabbit hole though, because you start going, oh, that's really interesting. Oh, that's really interesting.
It can be, but I think if you just choose carefully who to follow and just look at what they're posting, then it can be really helpful. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and I think if somebody's thinking about going to OT, I don't think they'd ever be out of a job. And
no,
the breadth,
definitely.
The understanding of the role now is much greater, and there are some real emerging roles for occupational therapists. You can, you know, work in any area that is of interest to you, and it's great to do a job where your own occupations are valued.
Absolutely. And when I was returning to practice, the other thing I found out was that there's all these breadth of other roles that you can go into with your professional title, so social prescribing, all kinds of things that just weren't around 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So you don't even have to if you don't want to.
It's not just
go
NHS,
straight back. No, it's you can go into all sorts of parallel roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and all that is available and there within the NHS currently to look at and pursue if you wish to.
Huge amounts of transferable skills.
Absolutely, there certainly are. Oh, it was really interesting talking to you. Thanks, Karren.